All I kept thinking was, man, I've been gone for so long, and I'm so close to my parole date, and then the world is hit with this.
For me, it's all about perspective, how I choose to view life's adversities.
While it may seem ironic that persons thrust into overcrowded conditions would suffer from loneliness, the paradox holds firm.
I didn't know that domestic violence was such a pervasive problem. I didn't know that most violence against women is committed by their partners.
Friends are hard to come by, harder still to find in prison.
Welcome, I am Ben Boyce, prison educator, poet at heart, and previously incarcerated host of this podcast. And today's episode is the second annual recording of work inspired inside prison walls. This is the Captured Words Free Thoughts episode. Much of this work comes to us throughout the year from prisons around the country, but this year the project became a bit more personal than usual because a few of us editors taught college classes inside Colorado prisons, and some of our students submitted work related to what we've been teaching them, and it's really good. You can find links to the full edition and every edition of Captured Words Free Thoughts in the episode description, or just Google Captured Words Free Thoughts. And if you or someone you know who is incarcerated wants a paper copy, get a hold of me and I can make sure that happens. If you want to submit anything for next year's edition, send it our way. We're always on the lookout for new work. You can either email me or you can snail mail it to CU Denver, 1201 Larimer Street, Denver, Colorado, 80204. There are a lot of voices in this episode. You might recognize my partner and best friend, Dr. Erin Boyce, who spent her own deal of time in jail before I met her. Dr. Stephen Hartnett, who heads up this entire project and manages to put together a new team of volunteers every year. And I also invited Meghan Cosgrove, who was a master's student last year, but this year she actually taught a class in one of the prisons. She's a great ally, a greater teacher, a good friend, and maybe most importantly, she clearly loves what she does. You'll also hear Bill Yousman, who read one of his poems from last year's publication. Thanks to all of the artists who submitted work, and to everyone who stepped up to record audio versions of these incredible pieces of poetry and prose, and to my on-campus communication, prison, and social justice class, who worked to lay down a lot of this audio. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, this is Stephen Hartnett from the University of Colorado on our beautiful downtown Denver campus. I want to thank everybody for their tremendous support for our programming over the past year, and I want to thank all of you for listening to this terrific podcast that Ben has put together. I want to prepare you for the hard-hitting emotional impact of some of the stories and poems you're about to hear, alert you to the great commentary that Ben and his wife put on the podcast. It's terrific just to hear them talking about the work. And I want to remind everybody that even as COVID continues to spread, we are going to do our very best to renew our democratic principles. And that's what our programming in the prisons is about. That's what our magazine's about. That's what this podcast is about, is renewing our faith in and our practices in community-based democracy. So enjoy the show. Thanks so much.
Incarceration is one of the most traumatizing and dehumanizing experiences an individual can be forced to endure, and yet it was made unimaginably worse as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As instructors for CU Denver's college and prison program at 2 Colorado state prisons, Territorial and Sterling, we were aware that our experiences of COVID were significantly different from those of our students. In an effort to create space for students to reflect on their experience and for us to learn how to best support them, we asked that they write about how COVID impacted their incarceration. In an effort to showcase their talent in prose, we asked them to write about the articles and theories they were reading. We are honored to share some of these reflections with you. The pieces featured in this publication offer a glimpse into the harsh reality of incarcerated life during a global pandemic and the hope of each student that tomorrow will bring something brighter, both inside and outside of prison. Humbly, Ben, Tyrone, and Meghan.
Friends are hard to come by, harder still to find in prison. Today, I walked another across the yard to the gate which separates us from the rest of the prison and the rest of the world. We knew this day was coming. I work in the program office where all transfer orders get processed. This morning, I saw his name. Ramirez C., Building 11, Cell 229. The little brother who has, for years, walked the concrete with me, lap after lap, around the prison track. I got up from my desk and went outside, found him, and told him what he already knew. We had time to walk 2 laps, made plans to stay in touch. He will parole this September or next, or some September soon enough. I am serving life without. We both know what our parting means. We will never see each other again in the flesh, but we don't speak about it. We talk a little shit like good brothers do, silently aware that we are dusting off old inside jokes for the last time. They call his name over the loudspeaker. It's time. We pull a beat-up orange plastic cart between us. It's full of his boxed belongings and things that don't need to be said. It's okay. Our evasion speaks to the silence. It's all part of serving life, part of my cosmic debt. At the gate, a fist bump, a quick hug, no eye contact. Surrender, helplessness, accepted sorrow. You take care, man. I will. You too. He walks back to the officers that will escort him, and I head back to the solitude of my office. At my desk, I weep as quickly and quietly as I can, and write a poem about having to say goodbye.
You've been on the show before, Erin, Dr. Boyce, depending on who's talking to you. Welcome. What do you think?
We don't often think much about the relationships that are also formed in those environments. We have so much construction around what prison is and the war and the fights, and everybody hates everybody, that real connections are often formed in there just due to the circumstance, and that there is a process of loss and grieving that comes when those people you form relationships with are on a different trajectory than you. And guessing that it is likely a place where it is difficult to form relationships in the beginning, so when you do find one, the loss would feel greater. Yeah, I was in primarily county jails. I never went to prison. But depending on where I was, a larger city, there were a lot of people in one space, and in smaller cities, at times I was alone. So it really depended.
Especially when you get to prison, it sounds weird because there's this saying, do your own time, and everybody gets their own sentence, but we do our times in like small groups or in pairs. I think back on my drug life and my prison experience the same way, where I'm like, there was a lot of relationships that work far different than those in the world because they're based on desperation, and they're like really all that you got.
Trauma bonds.
Yeah, I'll take that.
I pick up my pen to escape between the lines. I scribble freely, like tears down a cheek, expressing my joy and pain, releasing pent-up emotion that emerge liberated, no longer held about the contents of my mind. I pick up my pen and let it bleed on blank paper, staining it with my rotting thoughts to clean my soul of apathy and ward off what will germinate tomorrow, be it the seeds of friendship or prosking. I pick up my pen to touch minds and souls that are my window to the world, mind-free souls receptive to humanity and willing to provide the key to my mind remain free. I pick up my pen to console my loneliness.
Did you write it all when you were locked up?
No, I really didn't. I read a lot when I was locked up, but I didn't write. I didn't really find a love of writing until I went to university. I wish that I would have had some of that prior to going, because it's not something I ever picked up.
I'd get up at like 6, 7 in the morning every day before anybody else was up and just go to town, write letters, write like creative stories. One of the few ways that when you're stuck behind these walls, you can still get out. Even if you are completely muzzled in our country behind a prison wall, hated by the world, you still have the ability to swing a pen. Were you ever locked up during the holidays, Erin?
The last time that I went to jail when I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, I was arrested on July 7th, I want to say, so it was right after 4th of July. I remember I enjoyed 4th of July and then ended up going to jail, and I sat for 6 months waiting for trial before they dropped all of my charges. And so I was released on, I want to say like December 17th. So I spent Thanksgiving locked up, but I was home for Christmas. Not quite the same, but...
That counts, I guess, yeah. Thanksgiving's usually the best meal of the year. Christmas is pretty good too, but usually they really do it up on Thanksgiving. I was in there for 2 or 3 Christmases, and it is such a bitter day to be in jail. But no matter where you put us and try to just beat the life out of us, we will always find a way to thrive.
This is Happy Holidays in the Era of COVID. It's All About Perspective by Dortell Williams. As the holidays creep upon us, and loneliness, along with other anxiety-ridden feelings, emerge and linger, I've purposed in my mind to be festive. After all, things could be so much worse. For me, it's all about perspective, how I choose to view life's adversities. I think Viktor Frankl said it best. The last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. I had to learn this philosophy the hard way. In my stupid youth, I embraced a fatalistic perspective. My fate was either prison or death as a result of the choices I made. Poor choices that promised me nothing other than negative results. In order for me to reach that level of low, I had to ignore all the good, all the right, and all the positive in my life. I took a lot for granted. That was then. Now you can't pay me to call it a bad day. Rain, clouds, it's still a beautiful day. My glass is half full. I had to learn how to bounce back from the inevitable adversities of life. I call them challenges. We all have our challenges, and we're all capable of conquering them. The truth is, there are a lot of problems in the world, but there's definitely more right than wrong, more fixed than broken, more love than hate. Otherwise, life would have swallowed us up by now. And at the end of the day, you can't have a testimony without a trial first, right? So I have learned to welcome the challenges. Like a pugilist in the ring, I am willing and ready. As an incarcerated person, I miss my family every day. Now that the holidays are here, there's not a minute that goes by where I don't fervently wish to be with kin. And with the Rona, I can't even enjoy them through a glass visit. Now we're truly all in this together. We're all discouraged from visiting family during the holiday season. It's sad, yet that is the reality of things. By refraining from visiting those that I love, I am actually saving their lives, and they are saving mine. The bigger picture is to live another day, the day we're all COVID-free, healthy, and safe. So happy holidays, on the phone, on Skype, through the mail, whatever it takes. The way I see it, with all the rain checks I'm owed for hugs, by the time we're safe again, I'll be one warm, beloved, and happy man. It's a choice, 'cause it's all about perspective.
I can't imagine where that sort of positivity comes from in the midst of doing a prison sentence. And Dortell's been contributing work for a couple of years now, so he's been in for a while.
When you hear poems, they're often like a moment in time. But this is a story that you get to follow this person through. And the idea of the only future I have is death or jail is, sorry, I'm going back to my roots, but such a common feature of trauma that you can't see past tomorrow most of the time. There's something to recovering from and finding your way through trauma when you can begin to see more of a future. Hearing that story, I don't know who he is. Maybe he does have a therapist in there who's not too bad, because it sounds like a lot of work around changing those thinking errors, which we align with trauma.
If you got a good therapist in prison, it's because you got a good bunkie. They have counselors, and everybody is technically assigned one when they get to every prison. So even when you move, you get a new counselor. You always have somebody whose job it is to like check up on you. But aside from intake, I don't think I ever actually saw my counselor. I think they're there to like if something goes terribly wrong, or maybe once a year they check in.
The part that struck me the most was his ability to connect himself to other people. We're all going to be alone this holiday season because of Corona. And now we're in this new year where we actually canceled plans with our families. this ability to connect himself to other people and reaffirm his own humanity, which is, again, this big piece that we always miss in that, right? Well, you're in prison, you deserve to spend the holidays alone because we have this revenge mentality. But now, maybe in going through this, you can see some of yourself in me. That is something that begins to change our perspective, seeing of others' humanity.
Yeah, Dortell actually submitted more than one poem, and a couple of them were really powerful. You mentioned therapy. I don't know as it's necessarily therapy that results in us, taking this new perspective, but I had the same reaction, too, to some of these pieces that I'm like, how does somebody in that situation that has every reason to just double down on self-preservation and all the toxic beliefs we've held our whole life, from what a man's supposed to be that gets so many of us killed every year, all that stuff, and instead chosen a different perspective. But he's done it as well in this next poem, which is about domestic violence.
Stop Domestic Violence by Dortell Williams. I didn't know that domestic violence was such a pervasive problem. I didn't know that most violence against women is committed by their partners. I didn't know that an astounding 1 in 4 women report intimate partner violence, or that every single minute 24 U.S. women experience intimate partner abuse. I was raised in a household of paternal domestic violence. Over half of U.S. prisoners share my experience. What I do know is that domestic violence is a learned behavior. It is generational, because hurt people tend to hurt others. Apart from the secrecy of our household, American culture glorifies the objectification of women. James Bond taught me that women are conquests. Baywatch showed me that women are sexual objects. Music videos instill that women are servants to men. Classes and books return me to mainstream reality. Now I make it my mission to inform my peers that domestic violence is wrong. Now I emphasize that domestic violence begins with verbal insults, belittling, and controlling. And these forms of non-contact abuse can be just as damaging, because physical injuries often heal faster, while emotional trauma can last a lifetime. Today, when I hear guys making gender jokes about women, I call them on it. When I hear guys calling women out of their name, I remind them that our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, and aunts are all women, and that the women they are disrespecting are somebody else's grandmothers, mothers, sisters, and aunts. I remind them that we shouldn't be disrespecting the gender that brought us into the world. Now that we know, I hope you'll join me on this mission.
Sounds like he's been reading his bell hooks.
Finger snaps. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It was...
It's really what this made me think about is feminism, the definition of what feminism really is. It's not just a movement all about women gaining the upper hand. At its heart, as Bell Hooks taught us, it's really about equality.
Well, yeah, and that's, again, a theme I'm seeing through his work, and it'd be interesting to go and read other works, even earlier, to see this progression that clearly it feels like comes across in his writing. But yeah, that it has that feminist pull on our own humanity, right? That to be a man speaking towards a woman's issue requires that man to see the woman as a full human. And so there's something really deep in what he's doing that brings humanity to the front and center of his work.
Yeah, you mentioned therapy in the last poem, and this is what it usually looks like. It looks like a guy like Dortell coming out on the yard and kind of knowing you from a basketball game last week or whatever, the few things you can do in there. He overhears you say something, and instead of just walking by, he turns around and is like, look, I just want to give you a shout out. And he leaves, and you're like, that weird, what was that, right? But the more you start to hear those people who you think are on your side express it like, no, not only am I not okay with what you're doing, but you got to think about why you're doing it. It's violent. That is where that change usually comes from. That's where that therapy comes from. Sadly, in prison, most of the getting better comes from other incarcerated people around us or from the reading we do.
Misconception by Vance Hicks. How can a black hoodie, a bag of Skittles, and a tea be the death of me? Racism and injustice rules society. The police and the courts back this madness. Let's shake this evil baggage. Racism and weapons lead to murder and misconception. Simply walking down the street and being black. A whole stigma comes with that. Yeah, must be strapped. How biased is that? He's a criminal because he has cornrows. He's a gangster. Look at his clothes. He's a killer. Look how he strolls. This is sick thinking. Look how it unfolds. Innocent people's lives being taken. This is racial cleansing in the making. Now communities are being shaken. A black mama cries tears of justice. A month passed, and the police ain't moving fast. The people are clicking. They're starting to gel. Temperatures rising. Racial banners are flying. Black hoodies and black boots. Let's stand in truth. If this is the start of a new movement, then I must salute. Rest in peace, Trayvon Martin, a victim of racism and misconception.
On that story tip, right? There's a lot of them in there. People you can tell have been thinking about this for a long time and figuring out how to put it out into words that strike hard.
Yeah, I think I might actually use that in one of my classes. So I teach the idea of dominant narratives and counter narratives. And black kids in hoodies are someone that you should be afraid of, right? People in prison are this or that we have these or people are lazy. We have these very common dominant narratives that flow within our society that we're taught to believe. One of my things that I really encourage my students to do is engage in counter narratives, to hear narratives of other people that push back against that dominant narrative. This really feels like captured words, that it captures the heart of that counter narrative. There was a young black male who was shot and killed by police, 17 years old a few years ago, named Antoine Rose. And one of his teachers from school actually released a poem that he had wrote in class that was, it's so go back to trauma, that was very predictive of his death, right? That when you see me, this is what you see, but that's not who I am. And then he ends up being a victim of police violence. You have this real sense of this entire project being a counter narrative to the dominant narratives we've been provided all our lives about people in prison or people of color or any marginalized group. And so even for us, when I think about it, what happened to Trayvon Martin was kind of a turning point even in our lives. It was something that really resonated with us and got you and I having more intense conversations about race and our own perceptions of race. And there's a connection to that one that I feel myself, but also love the beauty of the counter narrative in that says something different.
I once was weak, not me. I am strong. You can't break me. You see, in prison life, I carry this knife in my back. It doesn't ever move. It actually protects me. So you see, when I turn my back and you want to stab me in the back, not me. That's why the knife stays in place, to protect me from people like you. You're the coward. You can't break me.
Some of them make me sad. I mean, I get it. It's not a judgment so much as that's what prison is. As much as we think it's like, well, everybody just wants to misbehave, but the people that go there are the people that do misbehave. No, it's usually the people that are so traumatized, the word for the day, or abused or beat up, that they have learned and know in their hearts that the best way to be is to always on the defense.
Yeah, that was a little bit intense. And I feel like I've heard that sentiment a lot lately, right? And I know that this is, we're talking about people in prison, and so some different context here, but that idea of being broken, that you're so broken that there's something wrong with you, and, going to those thoughts of guilt and shame, that if you're broken, that how do you come back from being broken? I guess I wish there was different language to explain that didn't feel so kind of hopeless, which is, where I think we've listened to a lot of things that feel very kind of uplifting and the positive. And then you come to that and you're brought back down to reality that even though some people find hope, that prison's still a difficult place where people are harmed and where people do hurt and where people do feel broken. How do you really change that when your whole perspective is about revenge? So you're always having to watch your back.
Yeah, prison is always the end of a heartbreaking story. Like, not the beginning. I mean, sometimes it's the beginning as well, but it's always the end of a heartbreaking story that usually just gets ignored.
Can I, should I, will I decide how I approach my day? Should I, will I, can I decide on what will be my breakfast today? Will I, can I, should I decide if asking these questions to myself or to you give me or guide me closer to the correct answer? Should I, can I, will I decide that what was the most important question of them all would be this one I ask myself about my decisions, and I decide my approach, my breakfast, my answer, for my decisions I decide.
That one strikes the same chords in me as you mentioned on the last one, is like a place of chaos where you're stuffing people, and even when somebody sits down and tries to write a poetry piece explaining, let me just gather and take stock of the choices I do have so that I can really control my own fate, the list is like hard to even make sense of. It's, can I stare at the wall today and be happy?
Not to sound like a broken record, but a lot of what we're talking about is trauma, right? And we know that one of the core aspects of experiencing trauma is power. And so what I hear is someone grasping at, where can I find power in a situation where I'm completely powerless? That goes back to even earlier poems that we heard, that this idea, it's my perspective. I choose how to look at today, right? And that's a tactic of taking power back over your own situation. And so again, that's a theme that I see in here. Listening to this one really brought out, but thinking about the undertones of power and everything that we're hearing and how power operates in this sense, and that when you are locked away in a cage, that sense of powerlessness is probably so much more intense. And so where is it that you find power? And even if it's choosing what to eat, if to eat, those kinds of things, it gives you a sense of your own humanity.
Depression on Lockdown. Prisoners Empathize by Dortell Williams. Depression is debilitating. Depression saps one's energy, induces whole body numbness, and stimulates streams of negative thoughts. In the extreme, those negative thoughts can provoke suicidal ideation. As a prisoner serving a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, I know about depression from first-hand experience and observation. Fortunately, I've learned to utilize a number of resilience practices. I bounce back from adversity fairly quickly. Yet I've witnessed too many successful suicides to count. Sadly, many of us prisoners have. California's prison population has the highest suicide rate in the nation, and consistent with this contagion era, depression in the free world has skyrocketed as well. The World Health Organization, using informal surveys, estimates that 45% of the U.S. population is depressed in the COVID age. Iran self-reports a 60% depression rate, and China reports a 35% rate of depression. Yet, we will get through this. There are many triggers of depression. As with those in larger society, prisoners wrestle with long-term loss of autonomy and uncertainty. Prisoners are arrested by thick bouts of anxiety and isolation. And while it may seem ironic that persons thrust into overcrowded conditions would suffer from loneliness, the paradox holds firm. Human beings, whether confined in a home of luxury for a few months or in a barren cell of concrete and steel for decades, tend to withdraw when depressed. We self-isolate. Free Americans are largely depressed because they understandably desire to get back to work, visit their families, and have some control over their lives. There's no question that prisoners can relate to those needs. The one disconnect from prisoners in the larger world is that, for most free persons, abiding in their home offers both physical and biological safety. Not so for the average prisoner. Some readers may retort that prisoners are criminals, therefore they do not deserve such considerations. Yet rarely is any human phenomenon so simple. In recent years, DNA has proven that there are innocent people behind bars. And we now know that race plays a huge part in who goes to prison and who gets probation. What of those who suffer from substance abuse disorder and would be better served in treatment centers? And what of those who have reformed themselves after years or decades of self-help? Isn't that what we want and expect from the Department of Corrections? Of course, all human beings are susceptible to COVID, depression, isolation, and other vulnerabilities. The difference is context. Some Americans suffer adverse institutional and environmental contexts that others do not. thus driving different traumas, reactions, and outcomes. Whether bond or free, it appears we all have quite a bit in common. If anyone can relate to the concept of situational lockdowns, it is the American prisoner. And when it comes to debilitating depression, anxiety, and loneliness, the prisoner's collective expertise goes far beyond any textbook or misdirected media account. So prisoners empathize more than one could ever imagine. We wholeheartedly empathize.
See, Dortell can get dark too. He can recognize where he's at, but yeah, even in those moments, he still seems to manage to take that darkness and terrible feeling of hopelessness and still sort of spin it into, like, I'm connected.
Yeah, well, and he did it again, that humanity of, right, whether you're in your luxury mansion or behind concrete walls, right, we're all experiencing something similar. After that, I feel like I've said a lot of things that he just captured really, really well, and I want to write a book with him.
Go Dortell. All right, on to speaking of things that are dark. Have you ever known anybody that had a death penalty?
No, not to my knowledge.
At least not after they got it anyway. I haven't either. I have a couple friends that are lifers, like natural lifers, who are currently going through some of the Supreme Court updates where they've ruled that children who were convicted of a crime and sentenced to life in prison before they were 18, that's unconstitutional. So there's a chance that some of them will get out. But Dortell has one perspective, but if you're in prison for the rest of your life or the state is literally trying to kill you under pretenses of this is the right thing to do, that's a whole nother level.
Look who's talking, dead man walking, coming live from death row. Paying a debt a jury says I owe. My life was decided by who put on the best show. My innocence was never an issue. DA said I'm out to get you, and now I'm waiting the attorney line behind the guilty who admitted their crimes. Where are the protesters for my injustice? Where are the people that I entrusted? I'm a dead man talking with disgust, but I have no intentions on shutting up. Let me tell you, the death penalty is not a deterrent. Just admit, it's revenge, a system's means to an end. Sins beget sins. Cruel and inhumane treatment is your trend. Sentenced under the Anti-Terrorism Effect Death Penalty Act. My due process and illegal search and seizure under your Patriot Act. For talking, I'm labeled an enemy combat. My public tribunal was of your peers, judging me not on evidence but on their fears. Instant terrorist, United Snakes politics, and got me communicating with the TV, responding to the propaganda I hear and see. A dead man talking. I gotta watch where he's walking. I live under the gun, walk under the gun, patiently waiting on my execution date to come. And live TV will be banned. Yes, they will execute the innocent. They have done it before. What makes me different? Society, I object to your legal right to inject me with murderous poison. I'm too black for you to see your flaws, and the nerve of you to require me to sign the death certificate, gas or electricity.
Sometimes I get recordings that are really bad, and this was such a powerful poem that I wanted to preserve it, but I think my student was on the H line coming out of a tunnel or something because it's progressively got worse. But the idea is the machine, right? That as this human being is begging for their life, begging, please don't kill me, the machine's just grinding on. It's a start and a stop, and once we're done with you, that's what justice looks like.
Yeah, that one's, it's painful. You know, I'm a loud and proud against the death penalty. For me, it comes down to humanity. Like, all humanity is lost when we're at that point and we feel like you're unworthy of even continuing to exist. It feels like a bad horror movie.
Whose Neighbor Am I by Daniel Gamboa. This coronavirus, COVID pandemic, is relentless. It continues to take countless lives as its reach knows no bounds. This pandemic is not only taking lives, but is also ending livelihoods at a rapid rate. Ending livelihoods as tenant after tenant is being evicted. People from all walks of life are falling victim to this era of mass eviction. Human beings are having their very livelihoods taken from them by other human beings. And for what? Over money. money that landlords need from tenants who are unable to work due to the pandemic. No human being is exempt either. This affects all, be it working middle class, wealthy, or otherwise penniless. Being faced with homelessness, perhaps for the first time in their lives, can you imagine how that must feel? Now think of those who have already homeless to begin with. Being homeless is not an easy pill to swallow, especially with a family. Now those faced with no choice but to fall into that category and experience it for themselves will know what it feels like to live in real poverty, to feel less than. One must remember what led to this in the first place, a new human erasing virus. Just how long will this virus allow those new to real poverty way of living to live before they too are evicted yet again? Only this time, it's for good. So, who knows who will be your neighbor tomorrow, next week, or next month? My final question is, whose neighbor am I? The reason why I wrote this piece is simply to let all those out in the real world know that they're not alone during these hectic times. There are some inmates like myself who not only sit here and watch it all play out on the news, but are also affected by this pandemic. We have friends, family, and loved ones that we have to worry about as well, and we know it. Anybody's life can be taken at any given moment. I had COVID for 5 weeks myself, but thankfully I was one of the lucky ones who had absolutely no symptoms. Was I worried and scared? Of course I was. Did I tell my family? Of course not, because I didn't want them to worry. All I could do was hope and pray that 1, my family would survive this pandemic, and 2, that I would as well. All I kept thinking was, man, I've been gone for so long, and I'm so close to my parole date, and then the world is hit with this. I just want to make it home to my family. Yes, even inmates in prison all over the world have hearts, family, and feelings. We're affected just like you.
Deep, right?
Yeah, and again, it feels like a similar theme, right? That's like, see me, I'm just like you.
Except in prison, like
Right.
we forget sometimes that prison, if we're out here and we don't have people in prison, that their cages right next to each other. There are people describing at the beginning, especially of COVID, before the prisons even had any idea what to do, that every time they would pop the doors to let people out to get their trays, people would be falling down and cries of "man down" would go out through the prison. And it just became the phrase associated with it, man down, because they couldn't keep up with them all. You'd be in your cell sick. You're so close to everybody that you cough, it goes up into the vent, which is just a hole into the next cell over. And, of course, whole units were getting COVID.
I was really moved, too, by that sense of solitude, even when you're in the midst of so many people, that there is a sense of, for people at times, that no matter how many people are around you, that you can feel alone and solitary. And illness is one of the things, though, that brings that forth. As mentioned in this writing, the idea that people who should be your greatest support system, your family, your friends, the people that love you at that time, it's not even something you can share with them because you're so busy in the midst of trying to survive to also protect the people that you love. And you're not able to have the people with you that would be your source of strength at that time. Stopping visits, so you're not getting to see your loved ones, and the changing of and how intensely this is separating people from their support structures, that once they get out they're going to need even more, and just how the system is continually making it harder and harder for people to be successful once they are released.
Months and a year in some places on end, no visits at all. No one gets to come see you. Mailrooms shut down because you clearly can't have stuff like that coming in and going until you know for sure how surface contact works. No phones because we don't have the power right now, and the people here because the employees are calling in sick too, the CEOs. So if you tell your family I have COVID, they're now in a spot to sit at home and not be able to check on you. And if you don't call the next day because the unit's locked down, they don't know. And to have that burden on you and to deal with it by saying, I'm going to keep that burden as opposed to sharing it, that's heavy shit.
Yeah, very much so.
I am reading Two Shades of a Color by Anthony Billings. There once were two brothers, George and Stephen were their names. They were twins in fact, yet were hardly the same. George had a giving nature and always put himself last. Gave food to the homeless, sometimes even the shirt off his back. Stephen, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. invested every penny he saved in hopes of becoming rich, while George did volunteer work and gave back to the poor. Stephen started his own company and dreamed of getting more. As George got older, his living status didn't change. Donated most extra income he got, just a little saved. Stephen made millions and lived merrily. Would rather buy another car than give to a charity. George believed in being benevolent, and his life was a proof. Stephen believed in being self-made, been like that since his youth. When George was asked why he lived this way, he said, "I just want to help make the world a better place." When Stephen was asked why this is how he chose to be, he said, "I just want to be successful and take care of my family." Twins they may be, but with polar opposite points of view. But there's a question pending, so now I'll ask it to you. If these two were your sons, I'm sure they would fill you with pride. But what if I told you to choose which one was right?
Stories, right? Some of these are pretty deep.
Yeah.
For as simple as a story is...
Parably. Like a parable.
Yeah, for as simple as a story it was, there was clearly a metaphor there that's supposed to be a statement on society.
Competing narratives of happiness and success.
Why We Can't Breathe by Michael Smith. The demands and voices of protest are raised across America. Voices of men, women, and children. Voices of rage, frustration, and then hope. And voices of discontent after hope have been lost. These voices, though anguished as they are insistent, are voices of a generation that has been largely made silent in the public square. Only through their poets and rappers have their voices been heard. But even then, commercial interest changes righteous rage into clever rhymes made suitable for their masses. Art, not intimidating life, but sending it down a street it had not intended to go. Now an awful truth emerges out of the sweet mouths of the youth. We can't breathe. Our Black Lives Matter, they shout. But who is listening? And why not? Because this is the richest country on the face of the planet. Wealth pitches pennies on the street corners of America. Because today's inner city schools are tomorrow's prisons, a breeding ground to sustain the status quo of the prison industrial complex. Because a simple education does not serve the special interests of a neoliberal state. For far too many Black children, childhood is but an illusion, denied by the pungent reality of discontent, harnessed by those sworn to protest and serve. Tamir Rice is but one such example. A 12-year-old boy doing what children do, alone, playing with a toy gun, became his death sentence.
Powerful.
Yeah, and I agree. It feels like it kind of captures everything, right? That even what we teach, what we do, what we value, and that it really kind of brings that all together. It's a nice exclamation point on the end of the story, almost a call to action that says, just because we're not behind bars, or just because maybe we don't have anyone super close to us right now behind bars, doesn't mean it's not our fight, doesn't mean we shouldn't care, right? The idea is to make it invisible, to put the big walls up so you can't see inside, and putting light on what's happening behind those walls.
As promised, Dr. Yousman agreed to read a poem he submitted for last year's edition. And since most of us listening are not in prison, it seemed appropriate to end with this.
Fever Dream. Cold Splash of Water in the Face. Sasura. By Bill Yousman. He sits down to write because that's what he does. When interpreting the seemingly sudden and widespread embrace of the Black Lives Matter movement in the spring of 2020, two important strategic and ideological aspects of the movement must be considered. First, contrary to the discourse of conservative media and politicians, BLM does not advocate violence as a path to social change. Second, BLM is grounded in a radically intersectional approach to the fight for social justice. Alicia Garza made this explicit when she wrote, "It goes beyond the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some Black communities, which merely call on Black people to love Black, live Black, and buy Black, keeping straight cis Black men in the front of the movement, while our sisters, queer and trans and disabled folk take up roles in the background or not at all. Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum." In a similar fashion, Kelly points out the ideals behind both BLM and the larger justice movement they are emblematic of when he writes, "They are trying not only to stop state thuggery, but also to create a new community dedicated to a post-racist, post-sexist, post-homophobic, and post-colonial world. Therefore, the new widespread public adoption of the slogan Black Lives Matter must be seen as paradoxical in that, wait, stop. He can't do this. He can't write another academic paper. He can't offer a theoretical analysis. Fever dream. 4% of the world's population, yet 25% of global carbon dioxide emissions, 25% of the world's prisoners, 25% of the world's COVID-19 deaths. Funkadelic told us America eats its young. Who would sacrifice the great-grandsons and daughters of her jealous mother by sucking their brain until their ability to think was amputated? Cold splash of water in the face. Even in the midst of global protest, global pandemic, global dis-ease, keep adding names to the list. Rayshard Brooks, 27 years old, a son, a father, a husband, a member of a family, a friend, a human being. Write it down. Keep writing. Even when you can't. Sasura. Stop. Something new is happening outside his window. Is the revolution being televised? White writes, instead of repeating the same deadly errors of official history, instead of stepping forward as a soldier, instead of getting on the train as a good German, instead of saluting the flag as a patriot, instead of going to work, instead of nodding in assent when addressed through all of our shared stupidities, why don't we try something else? Something that is more adequate to how we'd like to live. Fever dream. Mourning. Mourning. We've been in mourning for 400 years of mournings. Kushner wrote, liberation from oppression is, in the most concrete sense, a matter of life and death. Therefore, oppression is as impermissible and intolerable as murder. Oppression is, in fact, murder. To him, any attempt to dodge this truth or to hide from its imperative for immediate action was incomprehensible and unforgivable. Comfort with oppression wasn't bad because it might lead to a Holocaust. Oppression was the Holocaust, and comfort was complicity. Cold splash of water in the face. He looks out the window at a house where a multi-generational family lives. One resident of the house abuses the others, beats them, neglects them, steals from them, molests them. Finally, some of the residents, out of sheer frustration, sorrow, and rage, smash all the windows, rip the doors off the hinges. Neighbors, who have been silent for all these years, suddenly feel the need to voice their concerns, so they speak up, condemning those who broke the windows. Broken windows. Broken windows? Kelling and Wilson tried to tell us, social psychologists and police officers tend to agree that if a window in a building is broken and is left unrepaired, all the rest of the windows will soon be broken. Imagine that. The neighbors, psychologists, and police all agree. Did anyone ask the humans living in the house? Sasura. The Kinks sang, tired of waiting for you. I'm so tired, tired of waiting for you. Wasn't it inevitable, this multiracial, multi-generational, multi-gendered rebellion? The frustrations of generations boils over. It's Emmett Till, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and on and all of the other young, gold, male, female, trans, black people America has eaten and continues to eat every single day. But it's also the collateral damage of brutal racial capitalism. Our ancestral memories sense what has changed, and crucially, what has not. This is the heart of no justice, no peace. Fever dream. Screen 1. Such an unbelievable, but so believable, racist slur at a rally, so odious he won't write it down. And the almost entirely white crowd goes wild with approval, starts chanting it over and over. Screen 2. Multicultural protesters, led by black people, fill the streets with music and chanting and outpourings of love and defiance in a way this nation may have never experienced before. Taylor tells us, when white protesters armed to the teeth in Michigan and elsewhere make threats against elected officials, the president praises them as very good people, and they are largely left alone. They are certainly not suffocated to death on the street. In contrast, after Minnesota's governor activated the National Guard on Thursday evening, the president suggested that those who protest police brutality could be shot. 1861, 2020, the American Civil War moves into the next phase. Cold splash of water in the face, American history. The white woman in Central Park who called the police on the black man she said was threatening her, he wasn't, share the same last name. Cask makers all. There's a hole in the bucket, so fix it. Fix it. Fix it. Sasura. This is real, Odell tells us. Your eyes reading this text, your hands, your breath, the time of day, the place where you are reading this, these things are real. I'm real too. I am not an avatar, a set of preferences, or some smooth cognitive force. I'm lumpy and porous. I'm an animal. I hurt sometimes, and I'm different one day to the next. I hear, see, and smell things in a world where others also hear, see, and smell me. And it takes a break to remember that. A break to do nothing. To just listen. To remember in the deepest sense what, when, and where we are. Stop. He can't do this. He can't just write another academic paper. Coda. He wanted to end this with the last words of Elijah McClain. He can't. He can't steal that. He just has to stop.
Thanks to everyone who participated. Check out the online edition of Captured Words Free Thoughts for more poetry, artwork, and prose inspired behind prison walls. I'm Ben Boyce.